Hi, everyone. It's Martha Novak, and it is a beautiful day today. I hope it is beautiful where you are. Our weather is great. The geese are honking, and the crows are cawing, and the sky is bluing, and it is as beautiful as it can be. And I hope yours is too. We're continuing our series. This is, by the way, Real Talk with Martha Novak. We're continuing our series on being vulnerable. And quite a series it is too. Vulnerability is something that we just can't go for directly. It has so many different components. One of the components is how we blame ourselves. One of our components is self-forgiveness, and one of our components is self-acceptance. And then we can really go to those deep levels of vulnerability inside of us. So we're working through all of that, doubling back sometimes. And I think it's really important to do what we're doing. Now, you keep in mind that while I pull articles a lot of times off the internet and off my my trade journals, I'm always trying to give you a different spin on them, because this show and what I do is about consciousness and the advanced stages of consciousness, which are enlightenment. And so we must talk about things beyond the psychology. These are lots of different ramifications, and you keep in mind what we're really playing in is the esoteric journey, the part of life where nothing is really what it seems. So that's what we're talking about today, and we are going beyond some of these articles into that territory, because that's what we do. Let's do a prayer first, though, to put us on the same page, and I am delighted we are. You keep in mind, too, that this is kind of an all-denominational show. That's what this is for. It isn't about denominations. It's not about religions, which tend to be dogmatic and rather limited in their scope, in that they have borders of what's outside that belief and what's inside. This is not that kind of show. This is about spirituality and who you really are. It's about human potential. That's what we do. All right. Well, hello, Michelle. Happy Sunday to you. And Mark, I'm so glad that you are with us again. Thank you so much for joining us. That means a lot. So let's do a quick prayer, get us all nice and centered, mainly me, and then we will launch off into our show. Dear God, who is all there is, you who are all we are, and all everything is in this world, we thank you so much for the opportunity of being here together, of opening our minds and hearts and very beings to who we really are as our authentic selves, as the energy of the aspect of God we are. We thank you so much for the opportunity to be here together under one banner of wanting to know more about ourselves and you, which we find are one. What a wonderful thing. We now ask that we give up knowing anything, for it is you through us and through all things that know it all. We open to that you may speak to us directly through these words, or words of our own, and that we may know what the next steps for us really are, to this authenticity, this happiness, and this expression of who we are as contribution to the world. We thank you for all of this and say this prayer in your name, in the name of the Ascended Masters, our love-centered guides and friends, and in the name of all of us that are listening. And so it is. Amen. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am live today. And so the live number is 347-850-1647, but that is only to be used if you need to talk to me. Now, you can go to my website, marthanovak.com, and on marthanovak.com, under radio shows, there should be two buttons. One is Facebook Live, one is Blog Talk Radio, and you can certainly listen without being on the air at those numbers. But if you want to be on the air with me and we have something to talk about, which I'm always delighted if we do, that number is 347-850-1647. All righty. I'm taking today's show from several sources, and I will name them as I go along probably. This one is an article called 5 Factors That Make You Feel Shame. Hey, Kat. Oh, happy Sunday to you too, dear heart. 5 Factors That Make You Feel Shame. This is by a PhD named Dr. Sharam Hesmat. And I think it's a pretty good article, a pretty good way to start about why, we feel shame. What are the factors contributing to this? Now, I'm going to do a lot of quoting of him, and then, as I said, I'll go beyond it and put my 2 cents worth in here or there. And we'll go on from this article, but I thought this was, as I said, a good place to start. Keep in mind something I do want to put on the table right away, that it is the conflict within ourselves that's the problem. Do you know what I mean by that? It's the conflict between our egoic child's mind, like a child, and that is fear-based, and our highest self mind, which is the emotionally mature, healed, perfect as human beings ever are, part of us that is certainly capable of love and unconditional love. This is the base of that mind. So we've got 2 minds operating here. I often use a couple of examples, movie examples of this, because, by the way, this is a common theme. The theme of going from the fear-based self to the love-based self. Can you think of a movie like that? First one I think of is Casablanca and Rick's journey, where he is so bitter and he doesn't mind that people are selling drugs and killing each other in his cafe because he doesn't give a hoot about life anymore because the woman he loved left him, right? Married another man. All right. And then by the end, he has grown so much spiritually that he arranges for her to go with him and escape the Nazis. Wow, what a story. That's certainly a fear-based self to a love-based self all the way. It's a common thing. And if you put your mind to it, I'm sure you'll think of other things. The point that I'm making right now is there also a theme of not being resolved between these 2 selves. And we see that in a movie like Sophie's Choice. Now, this is spoiler alert. Guys, it's still a good movie, even if you know what's going to happen. This is my business, so let me tell you, it's a great movie. And Sophie's Choice is, here's a spoiler, that she is Polish, and they are loading the Jewish Poles onto trains to take them to the death camp. She has 2 little kids. She has a little girl in her arms. She has a little boy by the hand. She runs up to a Nazi. It's night, and everybody's screaming, and there's chaos, and families are being ripped apart, and luggage and possessions are being taken away, and it's just awful. And she runs up to a Nazi soldier and says, "Please, please let us go." And he says, "I will if you give me one of the children." She is clearly in a reactive mode, which is always egoic, by the way, because she's afraid. Her fear is heightened. And when he harasses her and she says no, and he harasses her and harasses her, and the energy goes up, escalates, making her even more reactive, she screams, "Take the girl," and she runs away with a little boy. Now, the quandary here, and it is up to everyone to decide this, and I don't know what the decision is. Thank God most of us will never have to face something like that. But you have to say, is it the highest self? And there is no, guys, this is a subjective answer. There is no right or wrong here. It's subjective. It's about you and your sensibilities. Is it better? Is it the highest self that everyone die together? Or is it the highest self that one should be sacrificed? By the way, she tried to sacrifice herself, and he wouldn't let her do that. Is it best to sacrifice one so that two can live? I don't know the answer to that. I hope we don't ever have to make that choice. My point, though, in starting with a story like that, is we are all conflicted on the inside. There are parts of us that are, what do I want to say here, that are just in conflict. The ego child's mind and what it has done or not done is in conflict with the highest self that feels what their nature is and what could be done according to nature, to our natural authenticity. The problem comes with our not making our peace with those two selves. Certainly Sophie didn't. I won't tell you the end of the movie, but she never could resolve that. There are other movies like that. I think of 12 O'Clock High, about the Gregory Peck character who sends soldiers to battle when he knows it's a losing proposition and they're all going to die, but he has his orders, right? He can't resolve that either. So it's up to us in consciousness, listening to a show like this, to start the process of resolving those two selves so that we are one thing, that we are one authentic person who forgives the humanness and is trying their best now in the present. I often use this quote that the Chinese say that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, but the second best time is today. So it isn't really about what you did as much as it is about what you're doing now and how we can make that better. Certainly, in my classes yesterday, we were talking about this, and I was telling them a story about this. I think of this as a redo, if you will. And there are certain things that cannot be redone for that specific scenario, but there's a lot that can be done in the present time. And I told a story about years ago, and I still feel so bad about this. I hit and killed a dog on the expressway right out in front of me. Just broke my heart. I love animals, loved animals before that time, love animals now. I can't do anything for that poor dog, but I love animals now. I'll rescue anything. I will make sure it has a good home. I'll make sure that it's as comfortable as I can. I have as many cats and dogs as I can, and certainly will help all the others. I really love them, and have certainly from that moment on, it influenced me and really woke me up. I'm very careful on the highway. I'm very careful on any road. Right now, it's fall, and a lot of little raccoons are out. You see them all over the place. They're hit by the side of the road. They're dead. And man, I pray for every one of them, and I pray for the drivers that are driving by. You see, this has really influenced me, and I have, while I can't do anything from the original source, my redo is to do something in the moment when there is something to be done. I hope you all understand that. So nothing is beyond you now. If we can't go back and fix the original source, it really becomes, what do you live now? What are your decisions now? And that's important as part of your process. Okay, now, We're going to go into the 5 factors that make you feel shame. Again, this is by Dr. Shahram Hesmat, and I thought it was a pretty good place to start. He says, shame is a very powerful emotion that responds to a sense of failure to attain some ideal state. What I have found in teaching about shame for a while is that we have these ideal states in our mind. Sometimes we don't even know we have. We have standards for ourselves that are virtually impossible and certainly unrealistic and many times inappropriate. We have them anyway, and then we punish ourselves for not meeting them. Then we feel like failures when we've never done the really mature thing, which is question the standard. One of the things to do when you question that standard is it even my standard? Because in many cases, these standards came down from a very critical mother or father. And you, because it is habitual for you to line and do those things and have those standards, when you are out of their house, you start imposing those standards on yourself. But are they really your standards? I think your standards are much easier. They are much more graceful. They give you the benefit of the doubt. That's the loving thing to do. If we're going to your authentic self, that's what's there. A nice, reasonable accepting of your humanness and knowing what you can do and what you cannot do, and cutting yourself some slack. Okay. Dr. Heshmat goes on to say that shame encompasses the entire self. The thought process in shame involves self-focused attention. How well I know. The people that are the most shamed, it's the irony here is they're very sensitive people. The irony is that many times they're not at all sensitive to the people around them because they're too busy beating themselves up because they are so sensitive and they've got some things skewed here. And they haven't asked themselves the really important questions like, is this even mine and do I want to continue it? And how, pray tell, am I perpetuating the perpetuation? Do you understand what I mean by that? We fuel things in our unawareness of ourselves. We fuel our patterns. For example, if you are afraid of people, you might force yourself to go out into a social situation and you're terribly uncomfortable and you come back and you tell yourself that, see, that proved that you should never go out. And we do that over and over and over and over again. And every time we use that pattern, it entrenches. It entrenches, and entrenches means you dig a deeper rut for yourself that tells you there are no other that. So sad that we are lonely and yet we're doing it to ourselves, you see? So what do we fantasize about? This brilliant, wonderful lover coming into us who will see us as we really are, but we never leave our homes. So how can that happen? We deceive ourselves, dears, and we must stop doing that. Shame certainly generates a wish to hide and to disappear, and even if it's extreme enough, especially if we are at all dramatic, and a lot of us are, a wish to die. Embarrassment, Dr. Heshmat goes on to say, has been characterized as a mild form of shame. It results from trivial transgressions, right? But whatever the trivial transgression, maybe it is your nose is running in public and you don't realize it until later. That's mine. When the cold weather hits, my nose runs. I want you to know, because I think it's really important for the work that we do, that we clarify some of the meanings of these words. What I want you to know is embarrassment doesn't involve an attack of the self on the self. It isn't much involved with the self. It is that you burped. It is that your nose ran. It is something embarrassing happens, but it's not about the self, right? Okay. Guilt involves a negative evaluation of a specific behavior. It is typically a less painful experience because the object of disapproval is a specific behavior, not the entire self. You understand? So I remember years ago, I was talking to someone that I cared a lot about. I was leading a huge group of people at a convention center. Good for me, right? Okay. So we took a break and I went down a long flight of stairs, like, the Gone with the Wind type stairs, to get a cup of coffee that was downstairs. And down there, who should come out of the room near the coffee pot but an old high school buddy of mine I wanted to impress. So, what are you doing here, Martha? I was telling you, I'm leading this big group of people upstairs, blah, 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 right? Well, cup of coffee in my hand, I turn around to go back after excusing myself, and I fall up the stairs. I fall up the stairs. Well, that certainly would give me embarrassment. It probably gave me some guilt over being so clumsy. It was interesting because I'm laughing now that I carried that around for years, probably still am. And I see this man from time to time, right? Because we have high school reunions, lots of fun getting together. And I mentioned that to him, and he didn't know what I was talking about. He hadn't remembered it at all. So the things we carry around, huh? They're so funny. Okay. So the object of disapproval and guilt is usually a specific behavior, not the entire self. It can, usually with psychology, it is thought of as a more is a healthier reaction to things, because guilt often propels us to do something about its guilt. We will go and apologize, or we will do something about it. I'll certainly be more careful walking upstairs. Oh, my little buddy. Anyway, shame is something different. Shame is actually an attack on the self. That can never feel good. An attack on the self. And it's often a self-attack. Sometimes other people shame you. I am horrified by the internet and how people think they can do that. Oh, who the hell are these people? I mean, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. I don't read this thing, but I hear about, oh, so-and-so shamed so-and-so, and it's like, oh, for God's sake, we're all having a hard enough time with ourselves. We don't need 500,000 other people saying we did something right or wrong. It's ridiculous. Okay, so let's talk about shame and what contributes to it. Number one, this is according to Dr. Heshmat, self-awareness contributes to shame. In order to experience shame, we must have self-awareness that others are making judgments. Now, you will recall from my shows that I've done on cognitive distortions, that's a cognitive distortion. And energetically, as I am a teacher of consciousness, which is all about energy and going down deeper, what it is, what that implies is that your awareness of self is out there watching you. But the only dynamic place for you to be and for you to really control your circumstances and live in grace is from the inside out, not the outside in. I see that I've seen this many times in in acting classes. I've taught acting for years and years, used to be an actor myself. And as I would direct people, I'd be aware they're not even looking at the other person on the stage with them. It's all about them, you know. They're not even communicating with the other person. They're busy being out there, looking at them, going, am I doing this well? Entirely self-focused. But the irony here, it's a self-focus not inside you, but it's from outside. You know, you've learned as a kid to be your judge and jury. If you are, it doesn't hurt as much when somebody else jumps on you, right? So that's the self-awareness we're talking about. You are in the spotlight, hazmat goes on to say. It's hard not to say hazmat. Heshmat, Dr. Heshmat. You're aware of a set of rules or social norms that determine whether your actions are right or wrong. So you're going to be very concerned with labels. Now, this concern with labels is another cognitive distortion, isn't it? That you label things good, bad, rich, poor, right, wrong. There are no labels, guys. There's the best you can do. That's it. Okay? It's a much easier way to live. And these labels are really only there for the ego child's mind. And I think we've all been overtaught. We've been overtaught about all this. And at one point in our childhood, these things were very important. You have to learn to work within social norms. You have to learn certainly some standards of morality and ethics and everything in your years that you develop. But you can overlearn them. And when you're still labeling things instead of just doing the best you can, your energy is in the wrong place. It's out there instead of here. And, of course, the really damaging thing is when you label yourself as bad or incapable, which are two common things that you label yourself if you have shame. The second thing that contributes to the experience of shame, according to Heshmat, is self-blame. Shame and guilt are emotions of self-blame. In the course of daily life, he says, things inevitably happen. Human beings are naturally drawn to search for causal explanations for things. Assessing the situation, we may blame our spouse, the poor weather, or a lot of other reasons. But when we blame ourselves, we are most apt to feel shame and guilt. By incorrectly attributing responsibility, so for example, this is his example for obesity, mostly to personal character rather than to the environment or the context or pesticides or all the other things that affect our bodies and have us hold on to weight, you can feel shame. Last week, we talked about this at length, and I'm not going to go into everything. I do encourage you, if you did not hear last week's show, that you do listen to that, because I went through how self-blame starts. And suffice it to say, it's a great explanation that explains your life to the ego child's mind. When the ego child's mind sees something in its childhood that seems random and scary and unexplainable, you use "it's my fault" to explain things. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's what all children do. It is just simply what children do. They have to have an explanation because they will not live without one. If this is truly a random universe where you never know what's going to happen to you and it's all scary and horrible and painful, you probably won't live very long. So the self-blame is a device to help you survive, right? Back then it is. And unfortunately, because it is one of those things that is not brought to consciousness and not talked about like we're talking about it now, it gets buried deeply and we keep doing it. We keep doing it. We keep blaming ourselves as an explanation instead of realizing we don't need that explanation anymore. There are a lot of other factors that could be contributing to it, and you are absolved. And I think it's very important for you to look at this and go, am I really to blame? Am I to blame? No, it feels like I'm to blame, but I'm not. So what is the truth beyond this lie that I'm telling myself? You understand? I hope so. In terms of his obesity thing that he just gave you an example of, I'm realizing now, after all these years of work on myself, there are so many contributing factors to our bodies being in distress. It isn't just about eating. Certainly that can be part of it, but certainly our reaching for high caloric, very unhealthy foods is part of it. That puts the body under stress. The body's not going to lose weight if you put it under stress, but antibiotic overdosing, mold in your living environment, pesticides that we eat until we take care of our food and wash it well, and treat it. All of these things and more. All the viruses and bacteria that we have that we don't even know we have, right? We just put one foot in front of the other and trudge on, having no idea in what distress our physical body lives. Thank God, in this day and age, we're finding out now, and there are people that can find that out for us. Number 3, another thing that contributes to the experience of shame are standards. I think this is such an important one. He goes on to say that all of us have beliefs about what is an acceptable standard concerning actions, thoughts, and feelings. For example, at funerals, we know that laughing, expressing joy, and feeling glad the person is dead are not the norm. Okay. In most neighborhoods, dog owners carry plastic bags when they walk their dogs. The violation of these standards produce shame. All right, let's talk about that. I understand that. When I'm walking my dog and I forget a bag, yeah, I feel real bad about it, and I'll go in the house when we get back and pick up my my bag and go out and try to find the feces. So certainly, I'll try to do that. Do that instead of feeling shame, for heaven's sakes. Are you a good person or not? Did you just forget this one time or not? You see? I think that a really, really important part of your curing shame is your giving some thought to who you are and what are your values and your moral beliefs. Who are you? Are you someone that just throws dog feces everywhere? Or are you someone who just forgot the bag that day? And you'll go back and do your best, and you might not be able to find it. And that's a shame. But you're not shamed. You just forgot. You have other things on your mind. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of people resist doing work on themselves like this because they don't feel they deserved it. After all, they forgot the bag. That's ridiculous. There's no such thing as deserving in consciousness work anyway. Everybody is born with the same thing. You're just in the way or you're not. Right? And believe you me, everybody's in the way until they're not. Because that's the spiritual journey, to go from the fear-based self to the love-based self. And part of the love-based self is knowing who you are and what your values are. You know what, I did a show on values, I believe, gosh, I don't know, months ago, maybe a year ago. Anyway, I strongly recommend, really I do, that you go back to the internet and you just look up values, a list of values, enter that in your browser, and find a list that has more words than other lists. Print that out for yourself and choose the top 3. The ones not that you want to be, the ones that you are genuinely living right now. That's the rub. Don't choose something you want to be. Choose 3 things that you are 100% of the time. And then make sure that you are bringing those 3 things to every interaction. If you brought those 3 things to your interaction with the dog feces, I never thought I'd be talking about this, it would propel you to do certain things like go back and get the bag and pick it up, or at least try, and certainly forgive yourself if you can't find it. Wouldn't it? But here's the thing. As a kid, you've learned to abandon yourself. We all do. You have to deal with the emotion in the house as a little kid, and there's the force, and here you are, and you're helpless and small and weak. You be careful that those words don't go into and worthless, because that's not true, but that's what we do to ourselves, because there's an explanation for what's happening, right? Self-blame, that's where it starts. So we have to go back and we have to rethink these things, reorder these things, my dears, that's all. I'll say again, a lot of your standards are standards that belong to your mother and father. And we do not think without awareness, and I'm hoping that you'll accept it now, we do not ever question whether that's our standard. And is it a good standard to have at our age and for our circumstance? And do I want to hold that up? Or would I rather do something else in love and grace? I remember a client I still have this client. She has been with me for many, 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 many years. And oh, she's doing so well, and I'm so proud of her. But years and years and years ago, she would make herself crazy for the holidays. I mean crazy. I mean crazy. She wanted everything perfect. Is there a perfect? No. You see, it's only in our heads. That's the standard we got to let go of. She wanted it all perfect. So she would make herself crazy, and she would invite her family. She's got a big family. And she would have everything perfect. She would do all the cooking herself, and all the presents had to be wrapped just beautifully. And she had to find the same thing for everybody so nobody felt slighted. And oh my God, and having the stress on this woman. So when Christmas came, she was in the Christian thing. When Christmas came, she was a wreck. She was not, everybody hated these holidays. She was short, she was angry, she had completely abandoned herself to this idea of some sort of Christmas perfection. She created the opposite every time. I remember the first year I worked with her, I said, why don't you just clean your house and have everybody bring a part of Christmas dinner, so at least you're relieved you don't have to do that? Or why don't you go get Christmas dinner at a one of these places like Whole Foods that you can pick up Christmas dinner and bring it home at groceries from the groceries? Oh my God, she looked at me like I had sprung 3 heads. She thought that was the most ridiculous idea she'd ever heard of, and she couldn't possibly do that because she had these unrealistic standards that were literally killing her. I'm very happy to report that not only is she not doing that, but she doesn't even have Christmas dinner at the house anymore, and everything is just fine. It has come down to a normal, loving range of experience. You have to be willing to see these standards that you've imposed on yourself because you have self-imposed them. And I think it behooves us all for us to say, is that realistic? Does that give me pleasure? Does that give me pain? Does that give me, if not pain, does that just keep me from being as happy as I could be? Guys, time to make changes. Number 4, in the following things that contribute to shame, in these list of things that contribute to shame, according to Dr. Heshmat, is a personal trait. This was interesting to me because people that rate high on public self-consciousness, what does that mean? That means I feel like that people out there are looking at me and I'm looking at myself through their eyes, judgmental usually of self. They're likely to be the most shame-prone. On the other hand, there are individuals who are likely to blame others or attempt to avoid blaming themselves. You've seen these people. You may be one of them. They're all around. Where instead of realizing how harsh we're being to ourselves, we blame everybody else for being harsh to us. Guys, whatever, and I do want you to realize this because this is a big part of our spiritual awakening. It's a big part of our emotional maturity. Is the reason we see things to criticize in other people is because they're part of us. We're doing that. I think that's an enormous thing. I was very happy years ago when my advanced class all took responsibility for that. They're still taking responsibility for that. They'll want to criticize something that they've seen, or somebody on television, or they'll criticize a date or something like that. And they'll go, ooh, it's me. I'm doing that. And that's very powerful as a healing tool for you to realize, wait a minute, I don't like that because I indeed do it. The world shows us, the world's mirror, in many cases. But I want to tell you, not only is it a mirror for things like this that we need to change, but it's a mirror for the good things too. So you keep going. Okay. So I think it takes a lot of emotional maturity to stand there and go, I'm doing that. I'm doing that too. I think it is an emotional immaturity and very difficult when you are in a relationship with someone who will take absolutely no responsibility for themselves. And there are families that really invest in this. My family did not. They did not blame very much. Michael's family blamed a lot. Why? Why don't we just be responsible for us? Why shame anybody? Why do that at all? Why don't we just be responsible for us? Interesting, one of the reasons I love my husband so is because he gets that. The fifth thing that contributes to the experience of shame, according to this doctor, is self-esteem. This trait is defined as a subjective attitude towards oneself. And when a person thinks poorly of himself or herself, when faced with negative events, this person tends to blame his bad self. Moreover, frequent and repeated experiences of shame are apt to chip away at one's general level of self-esteem. I think that's absolutely true. I think there are two things that are big categories that we say. We say that we are bad, or we say that we are not capable. And I just don't think those things are true. I don't even sit down for dinner with you. Most of you I don't know that well. And I can tell you right now, those things are not true. You're put on this earth to contribute who you are authentically, and you're on the way to do that. If we're in this experience of this radio show together, you wouldn't even have listened this far if you weren't dedicated to that. A part of you certainly is. So I think that's a really important thing to realize. Where's the bad self? Give me the evidence of that. You don't have any evidence. Oh, you've done things, absolutely, that you're ashamed of. So have I. And not only that, you've not done things, and you're ashamed of not doing them. So have I. Now, the thing is, are we going to realize that and make our lives better now and make the lives better of those around us now, or not? Certainly I'm all for apologies, okay? But these 5 things impressed me because they cause a conflict between selves. If this is not resolved, and if there is not something that, by the way, we're going to go into next, which is forgiveness of self, if you have not forgiven yourself for these things, you stay conflicted. That is no way to live your life, and that is no way to create anything. If you're conflicted, your energy is going into the conflict and not into the creation of your life and doing good and expressing yourself and what you're supposed to express in this world as your creative potential. 2 different uses of energy. Now, I want to go on with his article, and then we will move on. In an effort to escape painful feelings of shame, shamed individuals tend to defensively project blame and anger onto a convenient scapegoat. In many cases, this is a partner. Why? Because they're supposed to love you anyway, right? I have never understood, and perhaps I'm just naive, and I'm perfectly willing to admit it. I don't understand why people that are in relationship with each other, that see each other almost every day, don't make the effort to be much, much nicer to each other. I think that only makes sense. Shamed individuals may then regain a sense of control and superiority in their life by shaming somebody else. I think that's what's going on the internet, quite frankly. If the people that were into this shaming people publicly saw that they were deflecting from their own lives, that they were trying to gain a sense of control in a life that they don't feel is in control, a sense of superiority when they feel pretty bad about themselves, I think they'd stop. The important thing is for you to know it and for you to see it, because the world changes with each one of us becoming aware of what's happening in the world, right? The long-term costs of continuing to blame someone out there for things that we should take responsibility for are certainly steep. Drugs, alcohol, all sorts of bad behaviors when threatened. These are people that have not learned to work through their own stuff. And it's up to all of us to learn that. We become more resilient individuals when we do that. If shame remains unacknowledged, as Matt says, a person may decide to focus on another emotional state, the act of emotional substitution. For example, he goes on to say, an ashamed person unwilling to acknowledge the feeling of shame can become angry with someone else making the other person a kind of scapegoat for self-blame. Anger is more comfortable to experience, isn't it, than shame? But substitution, he goes on to say, and I wholeheartedly agree with this, is a form of self-deception. It relieves the pain and discomfort, but it doesn't alter the feeling. It doesn't do anything for this continued empty, gnawing, awful place inside of you that you have not resolved. By not focusing on the shame and attending to other emotions instead, we lose the opportunity to understand the forces that work around us and within us. And that's a lovely thing to say. I'll say it another way too. And that is, you've heard me talk about this relative to relationships, but let's take relationships off the table right now. And let's talk about it in terms of shame. So you feel ashamed of, let's say, 2 things today, and you don't know how to deal with it. So you blame other people, and you just kind of sweep what you did or what you did not do that you're ashamed of under the rug. Okay, well, under the rug is a nice place. You don't have to look at it, right? Nice avoidance place. Avoidance is not good. So the next day comes, and you have 3 things you're ashamed of. Sweep those under the rug. Next day, 2 things. Sweep those under the rug. And 20 years, you have a nice big pile under the rug, and not one of those things has a name anymore. You can't tell what you did. You can't say, I did this and I am ashamed of it. The way to fix this, guys, the way to really have a dynamic expression of yourself and heal is to pay attention to the literal moment and fix it in the moment. You do something in the moment that you're ashamed of. Go and apologize. Talk to a friend or a counselor about it. Talk to yourself about it. Take the deception off. Take the deception, the self-deception away, and just tell yourself the fact. I found another article. I thought this was a very interesting thing, and honestly, I don't even know where this came from. It was under survivors of... Oh, wait a minute. Psychologist Edward Kubany, Kubany, and his colleagues have noted that survivors of trauma, and I will say survivors of any kind of shame like this, often distort their roles in the trauma in characteristic ways, with the result of feeling inappropriate guilt. So let's talk about those 4 ways, and then I'll go back to the other article. Number 1. People that distort, exaggerate the degree to which they were responsible for causing trauma-related outcomes. They exaggerate the degree to which they were responsible. Okay, so let's say your sister chases you around the house with a butcher knife. You can, in your more aware mind, say, wow, she needs some help. And that was really scary to me. And I hope Mother Nail will get some help for her. Or what you do is go, I'm not enough, I'm to blame, I have absolutely no value. Of course she wanted to kill me. I'm to blame for usurping her position because I was the youngest. Exaggerating the degree to which you were responsible. You weren't responsible in many cases. Number 2, believing that their actions are less justified than an unbiased observer would believe to be the case. So you can say, let me think of an example of this. Well, I can think of a really terrible example in my own life. I had a beloved first cousin. He really was. He was quite beloved. But he got into drugs and alcohol and turned quite mentally ill because of those things. There is a substance-induced psychosis that can happen, and he had it. So he would go after you viciously, and he knew your soft spots. And man, he would take the proverbial dagger and just have at you. He did that to me one time, and I moved away from him for 10 years because I couldn't take that. And then he came back into my life, and I was thrilled. And he got, within a few weeks, he was diagnosed with a very serious form of cancer that actually killed him. I wanted to be there for him. I love him, and I love him still. Loved him then, I love him still. But I saw him use this against people. Cancer makes some people nicer. It didn't, this man. He was horrible to people, to his girlfriend, to his doctors, to everyone. He was vicious. And so I stood above his hospital bed and I said, darling, I want to be here for you in the worst way, but I've got to ask you never to turn that on me because I want to preserve my love for you, and that's what I need to do. And he got so mad at me. He said, who do you think you are? And he went at me. And I said, well, you're not going to understand this, but I am not going to be here. If you need anything, I will come back and I will be here for you. But I'm not going to let you do this because you'll destroy my love for you, and I don't want that. I want to love you for the rest of my life. So I wasn't there when he died. He didn't understand. You know, I have such a strong belief, and I do feel like I have a good communication with things beyond, and I truly think he's been back several times. I can tell you funny stories about it, to tell me that was a good decision. Hard decision. So, going back to that story and believing that their actions were less justified than an unbiased would believe to be the case, it depended on, in that case, why I moved away from him. And if I moved away from him solely to protect myself, my little sensibilities that didn't know how to handle something like this, I think I'd feel real guilty. I had a good reason for moving away from him. He was going to destroy something that I essentially am, and had to give him and all people that I love. And I wasn't going to let him do that. So it's what mind you're coming from. Have good reasons to do what you're doing. And if you feel that your actions were less justified than somebody else would give you credit for, I mean, that's a very vulnerable story that I just said to all of you. Some of you all will understand that, and some of you might not. But I'm at peace with that. And you've got to find your peace too. You can't make the decisions that you make in your life based on what other people might think about it. You've got to decide what you think about it. And you've got to make the decision from the right mind. Is it the ego child's mind, fear-based self, or is it the love-based self that is trying to do the right thing? Number 3. Another kind of distortion is concluding that they were guilty of wrongdoing even if their actions were consistent with their values. So, you know, certainly that was consistent with my value. I choose to be loving. I choose to continue to love. I choose to not have people so challenge me with that in evil, terrible ways that I struggle to maintain my love for them. I'm not going to do that. Another part of me, a child part of me, could have absolutely concluded that I was guilty of wrongdoing, even though I was trying to make the fairest decision for us all. And perhaps a number of years ago I would have. But when I tell you that your values, and if you hold on to them and you bring them to every situation, even the hard situations, save you, they do. Now, it is a cognitive distortion for you to doubt that. Because the right thing to do for you, whatever it is the right thing to do for you. All I say about all of these is, what mind are you coming from? Are you coming from the fear-based self? Or are you coming from the love-based self? You see, that's the key to all of this, isn't it? Come from the love-based self. Come from the self that doesn't have the issues. It's transcendent of the issues. It is the issues, but it's so much more. The fourth distortion is concluding that they knew an event would happen before it was possible to know. Well, I think that those things happen sometime, but I think if there's nothing you can do about it, then there's nothing you can do about it. I think a lot of times, it's with us, I know it did with me, to tell us that we have certain gifts. When I was younger and in my 20s, I was having all sorts of experiences that were pretty fantastical. And I just was amazed. I couldn't believe it. I mean, they were just out of this world of things. I think those things, nothing dramatic, too dramatic, happens like that these days. I think they were there to show me that I had these gifts. And now those gifts show up in just this real quiet knowing. A lot of times when you're talking to me, when you call in and you say a sentence, I will hear the last of the sentence quite differently than you're telling me. I'll hear what you really mean instead of what you're saying. Okay. It's just a quiet knowing. I like it better this way, quite frankly. All right, let's go on with Dr. Hashmet's article. He said shame-prone individuals are more vulnerable to problems with drugs and alcohol. Yes. Substance abuse, yes. Because it serves to mask and numb painful feelings of shame and despair. Absolutely. And he goes on to say, and I think this is extremely important, he goes on to say that the healthiest way to cope is to own your shame and to allow shame to dissipate with time. And it will if you own it. I often use this image that you can't go to your neighbor's house and sell the things in their garage. And when I say, why can't you do that? You have to say, because it's not mine. But you see, you can have these feelings and still not claim them as yours. You can put them over there. You can avoid them. And that's not the ownership of them. And we must own these things. We must own them. I not only feel them, but I own this. I did this or I did not do this. I will stand here in the full light of day and own it. That's extremely important. That's vital for your healing. You know why? Because to do that, you have to self-forgive. That is the perfect lead-in to where we're going next, by the way, which is self-forgiveness. One of the things we want you to understand, and he says it, and I say it too, is no emotion lasts forever, especially when it is owned. These things will dissipate over time. Um, what I want to say about owning this, and I'm going to put something on the table to you. I think these small groups of like-minded people, I always encourage people to please, please go on and form some study groups around all these radio shows. Oh, I think it's so important. Or around the book that I've written, The Life You Want. Or around the Teacup Prophecies and some of the quotes in there, which are a real easy way for you to get ascended information. If you all talk about it and hash it out and think of it in terms of your own lives. I have quite an advanced class. This advanced class has been with me anywhere from 14 to 15 years to 19 to 20 years. We know each other quite well. When everyone started in this class years and years ago, they were very shy about their issues. These days, everybody just says exactly how they feel on the deepest level of their being and what they're doing to create it and what they're giving up. There is power in confession. I want you to know there is tremendous power in saying it out loud. Why? Because when you are on that level and when you form a group that has your back and is entirely trustworthy, that doesn't mean you won't have little disagreements and squabbles. Work through them. But does everybody stand there together or not? This is the most powerful group because we do. And it is an extremely healing group because you've heard confession is good for the soul. Well, let me tell you, it is. It's important to talk about these things. When you are shaming yourself, you don't talk about these things. When you are transcending the shame and when you're trusting God more, you do. It's an enormous way to self-forgive and have support in your self-forgiveness. I recommend it highly, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we have 22 more minutes. I'm wondering whether or not to start opening up self-forgiveness. What do you think? Shall we go on? Okay. I'll go on a little bit. We talked about how shame lowers self-esteem. By the way, this article I liked very much was by Beverly Engel, something called The Compassion Chronicles. The name of her article is Healing Your Shame and Guilt Through Self-Forgiveness. And she names 4 avenues to self-forgiveness I think are wonderful. And of course, I'm going to go past them a little bit, but here we are. She says that shame is incredibly unhealthy, causing lowered self-esteem, feelings of worthlessness, and behavior that reinforces that self-image. I want to go here because you and I have said we perpetuate the perpetuation. So here are some of the ways we perpetuate the perpetuation of shame. And by the way, this is just a partial list because you will have your way and you'll have some very obvious ways you're doing this, but you're also going to have some very subtle ways you're doing this. You want to know one of the subtle ways you do this is you make bad things good and good things bad. That's what we do, okay? And that's one of the reasons that we need a guide at a certain point in our work on all this, because we need to be called on this because we don't see all this. We're telling ourselves quite the opposite. If I am working on someone and I'm writing access keys and I say, and I'm using an access key for somebody, I drink too much and this is bad, that's not going to do a damn thing because that person says drinking too much is good. I've got to be much trickier in the way I precisely direct the energy of spirit to lift that off of them, because they have made that a good thing instead of something that's not so healthy for them. Hi, Julia. Well, that's wonderful. She says she's been working on herself. That's just terrific. And honestly, that's a really good thing. She was saying that she wanted to work on herself to attract a healthy, committed love relationship, and she has been working on herself. I want to say that, I felt my husband in my energy 5 years before he came in. He kept being there and disappearing and being there and disappearing, which I could not understand. I had already picked up certain things about him. What I did not pick up, and Spirit did not let me see, was he was an old friend of mine of 50 years ago. And his wife was dying. That was those 5 years. So what did I do? Did I just sit there and feel bad about myself? No, I worked on myself to be the best partner I could be and as clear as I could be. So when he came in, I would be ready to have a sustaining, wonderful relationship. Okay. So, shame is responsible for a myriad of problems. So here they come. Self-criticism and self-blame, self-neglect, which is a big one. Self-neglect can come out in assorted ways. I know one woman who will not realize how harsh she is to herself. So she goes to work and she comes home and she stays in her room and she stays there and gets up and does it the next day too. She's extremely harsh to herself. She wouldn't have to isolate and withdraw if she realized her harshness. She is waking up to that now. And stopped it. So she wouldn't have to isolate and withdraw and soothe herself, because she has to stay in her room and isolate and withdraw and soothe in that way because she's so bloomin' mean to herself and throws herself into terrible situations. And when she doesn't do something absolutely perfectly according to a standard that is totally unrealistic, she beats herself up. She's always worried that somebody's going to criticize her, you see. That needs to be fixed at its source. And then she'll come out of her room. It comes out in self-destructive behaviors, abusing your body through food, alcohol, drugs, cigarettes, self-mutilation, being accident-prone, sex addiction, any of those things. Gambling. Self-sabotaging behavior. It's starting fights with loved ones, sabotaging jobs, all that kind of stuff. We have to look at what the self-sabotaging behavior is. And here again, we have to be very careful, because you might think self-sabotaging is protecting you. This is a way to make something bad good, you see? And then we also do the opposite, make good bad. So this is where it gets real tricky. And you've just got to have somebody, if they're going to help you, know your tricks. Go and uncover them and change the energy of them. You see, if you change the energy, you change the behavior. You understand that, right? Because that your energy is wired a certain way is why you're behaving the way you are. Oh, Michelle just wrote, exploring past lives help us understand any shame we carry with us. Going to the to help us understand. Michelle, I'm going to say something probably pretty shocking. No. Your problem is this life. I actually also don't think there is a past life and a future life and a life now. I think that all time, and that there are various dimensions of you now. And the key to freeing yourself tremendously is making this one a damn good one. Now, once in a while, I do pick up those things, okay? I don't pick up past lives or future lives. I pick up dimensions of self. And once in a while, there will be something to pick up, dimensions of self-wise, but far less than you think. I think that's, and Michelle, this is I don't know how committed you are or not committed you are to doing this, but I am going to put this on the table because this happens with a lot of people. It's a great way to avoid what you really need to do, which is the vertical dive into right now and your life right now and what it has been all about. So that's the way I feel about that. It's not that I discount any of those things. I just don't believe in a nice linear little set of past lives and future lives. I don't believe that. I think that it's a much more complicated energetic system than we know. I think that the way we think of that and karma is a really good way. Thank you, sweetheart, for saying that. Michelle said that. She thanked me for that. I think that's a nice little neat way to help us understand, like the Shamrock and the Trinity that St. Patrick told the masses about. But I just think that the energetic experience is much more, getting a tissue off the floor, the energetic experience is much more complex than that. So complex that we'll never understand it, except to say, boy, it's going to be more complex. You keep in mind that everything we're talking about here in terms of psychology, layers and 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 layers, layers and layers and layers. Layers mix with other layers, and it's a complicated system. This isn't as easy as, for example, fixing your money problem. Because money is energy. We have to fix your energy problems to fix your money problems. You see? Good. So other things. Perfectionism is a big problem. Perfectionism comes directly from shame. You see? You have to be perfect. Or you're not worth anything. Well, maybe if not, you better find out how much you're worth without perfectionism. Thank you, darling Michelle. I appreciate that. We're all worth a lot. We're not just worth what we do, or what we think, or what we produce, or what we create. We're the whole package. If you're the whole package of God, you're the whole package of God. And we're just learning to get ourselves out of the way. The belief that you do not deserve good things is a common shame theme. And I've got to say, there is no such thing as deserving. You were born with everything I was born with, and everything everybody was born with. Everybody's born with the same thing. It's innate in you. It's immanent. Isn't that wonderful? But you're in the way, and we all are until we're not. And that's what this show is about. So instead of thinking that you do or do not deserve good things, we need to open you to the deeper levels of self so that you use your talents, gifts, and abilities and create a wonderful life for yourself. You see? You see how we distort these things? It is the child's mind that says, oh, well, that means that I don't deserve anything, or, I do or do not deserve anything. Because, of course, the opposite is true. You've got narcissists that believe they deserve everything, and they're entitled to it all. It's extremely important to know when you have taken a subject and you are being small-minded about it. You're thinking too small about it. And I think this is a perfect example, You think you do or do not deserve good things, and you're missing the point, which is, let's get everything out of the way. Let's be who you are authentically. Let's authentically give what you are here to give and express and contribute to this world, And let's keep your mind on those things. Some more problems that shame brings forth is intense rage, physical fights, road rage, all sorts of things, rage, explosions, blaming others. It brings forth acting out against society, breaking the rules, breaking the law, being defiant. And it also brings forth continuing to repeat the cycle of abuse through either victim behavior or abusive behavior. Michelle just wrote, Michelle said, "It is truly amazing when we don't get in the way. Such a light presence about it." Yes, indeed. And darling, that can be your life, you know? But don't be hard on yourselves about this. And I say that not just to Michelle, but to all of you. And we've got some phone calls here I should go to because we've only got 9 minutes left in the show. I'm so sorry. But what we must realize here is that can be our lives. This light presence, this doing your best, knowing who you are, trying to express from that. Why can't that be your life, your whole life now? And not in a fanciful way, in a real way. Let's go to a caller. Hi, I'm talking to a 917 exchange. To whom am I speaking? Hello? Oh, I just lost him too. Gee, I hate that. I think I know who this is, my friend Jay. Jay, you there?
Hey Martha, how's it going?
Fine, Jay. Yeah. I was so glad to see your number there. How are you, dear?
I'm doing pretty good,
So what's going on in your life?
Well, I had a performance review, and I wrote up about being shamed and not being a team leader, and got together last week on Wednesday regarding it. So
how'd you do on that?
Told me to write it over.
Yeah.
Well, he basically told me to write it over and just do something about yourself, not about the other person. Mm-hmm. And I just brought up some things that you should be aware of because you didn't know that he did. And well, he knew one thing that he did, but he stood his ground on the other things. But it was an interesting conversation. But they tried to make it up in a meeting that we were telling what I did to save some money in the company in a meeting that we have on Fridays at the office. So, but it was it's interesting that it brought up some points internally. It triggered some things in me, right? So with the family dynamics before my mother passed on and things. So
yes, yeah. It would, wouldn't it? That. Yeah, it would, darling. And I really feel it's such an easy thing for all of us, not just you, Jay, for all of us to blame other people. It's kind of a way to get off the track, because if we are looking in any way outside of ourselves like that, we're not going forward with our own life and our own creative potential. I see what people do. I'm certainly not blind to the world. I watch the news like anybody else, and I watch it and then I go, okay, let's go back to me. Let's get my mind on what I'm supposed to do next, what I'm supposed to develop, what I'm supposed to write, what I'm supposed to be right now. And let's do the best I can with that. I honestly think that that's the better way to live than to get so involved with all the distractions that are beyond us, that are not us, and that are out there. So I think that that's something that is really waking up in you right now, don't you? It's what it feels like.
Well, in some ways, yeah. Yeah, that's what, in some ways, yeah, it brings a lot of sadness to it too. So
well, of course it brings sadness. Yeah. I've noticed that in these major transitions, when people get very close to crossing that line into the death of the ego child's mind, really. The ego won't ever die, but the ego child's mind does. There is a mourning period that people go through of, wow, my life has all been about this and all that wasted energy. And I know for myself, I, super glued the back of my hand. Oh, yeah. When you get through that, you just go, you start seeing the perfection of everything. And it's like, wow, everything's indeed been perfect. And if I died right now, it would all be perfect. I would know it would. And it's odd because when one makes that transition, it is so, what can I say? It's like a bomb going off inside of you. Things will never be the same again. You'll always look at things that way. That it's always perfect. It's perfect. It's perfect. It may not be what I want, but it's perfect. What were you going to say, sweetie?
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say about perfect, because I think that we've got it all wrong. In some ways, got it wrong. That it's okay the way it is. We put a label onto it, and then we actually strive for that, and then we actually shame ourselves and failure around that. If it's not less than, like, if there's no defects, there's no problems with it, and it's got to be 100%. Liked by someone else, for example, right? So I think someone's got that wrong.
I think you're right about that. I think what you're taking us back to, Jay, is the fact that there is a perfection that the ego child's mind sees, where everything is the way the ego child's mind wants it to be. And there's a lot of striving, there's a lot of control, there's a lot of manipulation in that idea of, making something perfect. Or it is the highest self mind, which sees the perfection of God in how each piece, whether it has felt good or whether it has hurt terribly, has fit into a larger whole, and that the tapestry is perfect. And that's the important thing that we realize. When I talk about perfection, I'm talking about it that latter way. That it is, I know when this particular event happened to me, it was, I really realized I could die right there, and it was just fine. Everything was perfect. Everything was perfect. It was the death of the ego child's mind. I cried all day long. I was crying, believe it or not, at that point for relief. It felt relieving. It was such a huge burden that things were not like I always thought they were. Now, that didn't just happen with the turn on a switch. I worked for many years. I had no idea it was going to happen on that day in that little insignificant place, but it did. And your being too has a plan for you like that. Hang on just a second. Now you keep on the phone, darling, but I'm getting other messages. And Julia, wait a minute, yours, I don't know whether I can bring that back. Can I? Julia's message went by before I had a chance. Julia, you might want to write it again. Michelle said, I had thoughts yesterday that my past and events were not so perfect, but I am
90 seconds.
I'm now able to realize I needed that in order to be where I am today, and I'm so thankful. That's great, Michelle. Guys, Jay, I'm so sorry. I wish we had more time, darling, but I'm getting 90 seconds announced. So, my darling, please call back next week and we'll have a good discussion on all sorts of things, okay? And thank you so much for calling me.
Great. I'll call in earlier.
Great. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Goodbye, darling.
60 seconds.
Julia, if you want me to comment on what you said, I've got to have it, but it has escaped me, and I'm so sorry, my darling. When Michelle's line came in, that one was knocked up, and I can't seem to pull it down. Let's see. Nope, I can't get it. I will certainly check it when we get off the air, okay? Guys, we will continue this discussion next week. We're going to go into self-forgiveness, which is a huge part of self-compassion that's going to fix all this, right? And that's where we'll go next week. So we'll see you then, and thank you so much for being part of this show. We really appreciate all of your help. Please be kind enough to pass this on
10
and
seconds.
tell your friends about it and follow and share and all that kind of stuff. And I'll be praying for every one of you when we get off the air. Take care of yourself now. Until next week. Bye-bye.